Hi, my name's Rich Harrington, and today we're going to tackle one of the tougher subjects when creating graphics using Photoshop for video. The color red can be very problematic because of its saturation levels. Often it bleeds when you put it onto a video screen, and I've encountered a lot of producers who are very fearful about using red in their shows. But sometimes you need red, whether it be the client's logo or just a simple fact of nature. So let's learn how we can work with red and push it so it goes all the way up to our limits without exceeding. Here's how. So we have a photo here, and we're going to go ahead and create a very saturated version of this. To do this, we'll toss on the hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to go ahead and push it so it gets more saturated. Now that's doing a pretty good job, and I want the image to be nice and red. I'll click OK, and we'll rename this layer Boost. Next, I want to isolate the individual red in the photo. So let's do Select Color Range, and we'll click on the red here and hold down the Shift key and drag. What I'm trying to do is create a selection that encompasses most of the red inside of the image. You can go ahead and click here as needed and play with the fuzziness to taste. If you get an area you don't want, simply Option click to subtract, and it will narrow that back down. You see that does a pretty good job. I'll click OK, and now we have just the reds pretty much selected. If you see something you don't want, you can grab the lasso tool, hold down the Option key for selection, and it will actually subtract. So here we go. We can just select around this area here that we don't want. There we go. And you see that that's removed from the selection. I'll go ahead and feather that just a little bit. Select, Modify, Feather, which creates a gradual blend, and we'll do a 5-pixel feather. There we go. Add the hue saturation adjustment layer, and this is going after just the reds, so we can roll that, making it greener or redder. Don't go too far or it looks unnatural, so just a few degrees on hue. Let's do about a -8 and a little bit of a saturation boost there. And click OK. So here's our original image. Here's our new image with very vivid reds for the tomatoes. Now, how do you know what's going to work? Well, you got to take advantage of one of the filters built into Photoshop, and that is the NTSC Colors filter. Now, the tricky part here is running it on this image. So we're going to make a merged copy to run it and then test. I'll do Select All, and I'll choose to make a new layer. We'll just simply say Edit, Copy Merged, which copies everything that's visible, and then Paste. And it will place that right on top. So you see on the top there we have a flattened copy. On this flattened copy, we could say Filter, Video, NTSC Colors. And what you're looking for is any area where there was a shift. Now, if we do Command-Z for Undo Redo, you could see it right here. If you look down at the bottom here, you see that it's actually toggling the colors, and unfortunately, we're getting a pretty ugly posterization there. See? So what we could do here is fix this more subtly. I'll go ahead on this top layer and simply strip away all the color and make a levels adjustment. And what I'm going to do here is just try to push this to a little bit of a black and white selection. And you see how the posterization is really starting to stand out there. There we go. And that's pointing out some of our brightest problem areas. I'll click OK, and we'll just blur that a little bit. Soften it up. And load that as a selection. Go to Channels, load it. It's an active selection. we can come back and add another hue saturation adjustment layer. And what we could do now is just pull down the saturation in those problem areas, and if necessary, darken them a little bit. And that should do the trick. Now, the good news is that that process can actually be automated. So I'm going to throw this away, and we'll do that all over again, making it simpler. In the Actions palette, if you open it up, you'll see Video Actions. If you don't, just click the submenu and load the video actions from the bottom. One of the actions is Broadcast Safe Saturation. Now, do not use the Broadcast Safe Luminance actions if you're designing graphics for use in a nonlinear editor. Most NLEs these days correctly interpret the 0 to 255 luminance range and will map that properly for the video editing system. However, they do sometimes have problems with saturation, and that's where the Broadcast Safe Saturation action comes into play. With that selected, I can go ahead and click, and it will run an action that does all of those steps over again. It makes a new merged visible layer, runs the NTSC color filter on it, uses it to detect an edge, and it says, okay, we've added an adjustment layer here for hue and saturation. If the layer mask is empty, i.e. filled with white, then throw the adjustment layer away. See, what happens here is that the action isn't smart enough to say, do I or don't I need this? So if you just simply read the dialog box, it tells you if your hue saturation broadcast safe adjustment layer has a layer mask attached with a black and white mask, then it is actually needed and it's doing its job. I can click OK, and you see here that it did indeed apply and it was necessary. So if we toggle that off and on, you'll see how the little area here, notice, is being affected. Let's go ahead and just pull that up a bit. There we go. We'll zoom in. And if you look at that edge, look at the front of the tomato. You see that the saturation, it's a little bit darker and it's been pulled down. And that's it. That's how you could ride the edge. We went ahead and used adjustment layers to go after the reds, and we pushed them all the way out to the limit. Made them very vivid, very vibrant. We then took advantage of the Broadcast Safe Saturation adjustment, which is in the Actions palette, to clamp those and pull it back down. Now at this point, you'll want to check the graphic because everyone's standards for Broadcast Safe Saturation are slightly different. You could save this out and bring it into your editing environment and put it up on some vector scopes and take a look at it. And if it's too bright, then just back it off a little bit more inside of Photoshop. Remember, if you save this as a TIFF file, this is a piece of cake. I can go ahead and say File, Save As, and save this as a TIFF file. When I import that into my nonlinear editor, it comes in as a flattened file. I could then easily invoke the Open an External Editor command. It'll pop into Photoshop with all my layers intact, where I could tweak it, close it, and have it update. This is the best way to subtly go after that bleeding edge of saturation to get the graphics that pop, but not the graphics that bleed on the screen. For Photoshop for Video, I'm Rich Harrington, and I invite you to check out our resource blog as well as the book of the same name at photoshopforvideo.com.